expectation is that they will bring those barriers down. That's my expectation. And
this is where I draw some optimism. But we're really early in this. If this is prolonged, does their position on no retaliatory commitment, does that wane? And that's something we have to be hyper focused on, and we've got to be vigilant. I have a big concern, and I would, to what extent would you have a concern? Are we at the risk of losing the AI race to China if we lose our innovative edge and our exporting advantage over China?
So I think that we benefit from having huge innovation here in the United States. We have an economy that cultivates innovation. We prioritize it. We have an intellectual property system that protects it. You don't have those kinds of things in China, right? You don't have that level of protection. You don't have that level of attractiveness. Now, we can't be complacent by any means. I think it's incumbent on us to continue to have domestic laws and incentives to make sure that we're innovating here. And it's important to have manufacturing, because manufacturing and innovation go along with each other.
I'm going to add to that. So really what this boils down to, and I'll try to make it a little personal here. You and I went to rival universities. We're still working through some of those challenges.
For now.
Yeah. We may never see eye to eye on it, but we were both probably 40 minutes away from some world-class ski resorts on the Wasatch Back during those college years. During college, I always went to the Sports Den. It's a local sporting goods store, and I've known the owner, Mark, for over 30 years. I took my, every banner at every Little League thing has his banner there. He's committed to the neighborhood, to the community. He's weathered the e-commerce revolution. He's weathered COVID. He's been able to sustain this business through some of the toughest times. I took my son's bike in there on Saturday to get fixed, and I've never seen him like this. I've never seen him so anxious, so nervous about what's going on. He pointed to everything in his shop. I buy ski equipment from him. We rent stuff from him, all the gear. I've never seen him like this. And I would ask you, what do I say to him? He's really nervous right now, and I know it's impacting, and I know it's just a lot of concern. What do I say to him?
Well, I wish there was a silver bullet for this, Congressman, because I'm sensitive to this, and you all have constituents, whatever side of the aisle you're on, who are talking to you about this. The challenge is that we've seen 90,000 factories leave the United States, and we can have either the status quo and continue to lose that and continue to be dependent on other countries, in many cases foreign adversaries, for our businesses. I mean, to me, that's very fragile. To me, that's very high risk that we have to be so import dependent for our well-being. We're always going to trade. We have to have this reset. We need to move quickly. We have countries in right now trying to negotiate their way to more reciprocal trade. A country like China, they're always going to have their own agency and make their own decisions, and they've never been a reliable trading partner in a lot of ways. We've always kind of been at the mercy of that. So, it's hard to go into your constituent and say that, because they'll say, well, Ambassador Greer said this kind of macro thing. I understand that. Please keep in touch. I mean, as we hear these, the effects of this, it's good for me to know about it so I can tell the president and I can continue to communicate this. We've heard stories about this, and we are concerned.
So that's what I said to him. I said to him, because of our communication, he's still just as nervous, and that's just why I wanted to share with you and your team how important and crucial your job is over the next little bit. Because if this is looming, you have an incredible opportunity to do some of the good we did in the first Trump administration to get us to there. We're not there. I'm scared that we're not going to get there. I don't see the strategy to get there, but I know we can, and I really have a lot of confidence in you and your team to be able to get us there, and I yield back.
I now recognize Mr. Panetta from California for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. And Ambassador Greer, thanks for being here. I admit, before this week, talked to a lot of my colleagues about you. They actually said a lot of good things about you. You had a good reputation until this week, I have to say, because I actually wanted to work with you on solutions when it comes to free trade agreements. I think we still can once we get past this, and I hope that's the case. But unfortunately, you're defending a policy here from President Trump that's absolutely incoherent and inchoate. It's a self-imposed tariff regime of 10 times the amount of tariffs that were in place before this president took office. It is the largest self-inflicted wound to our economy in history, a self-inflicted wound that if it stays in place, it could constitute the largest tax increase on working families in more than 40 years, costing households more than $3,800 per year. A self-inflicted wound that prompted one of the largest three-day moves on the markets since World War II. And it's a self-inflicted wound that's leading investors to expect a severe economic slowdown. 8 years ago, this president talked about American carnage. Little did we know that he would create economic carnage that is spreading something similar across the entire global economy. Now, the reason for these tariffs is based on a national emergency that we have trade deficits, according to him and you. Unfortunately, the president's thinking about trade is reflected in this policy. This weekend, after the markets tanked, after small businesses fretted, and after the president played golf all weekend, the president said, "I consider any trade deficit a loss." That type of scorecard thinking, combined with the president's 40-year fetish for tariffs, that has put this policy in place and put us in the global economy in this position. Now, I know the president is painting all trade deficits as bad, but they are a product of larger macroeconomic factors relating to a number of things, as you know well: savings, investments, cultural, demographics, and so on. But the president is acting completely irrational when it comes to trade deficits. He believes that trade deficits are subsidies paid by Americans to other countries. His scorecard ignores our trade surpluses and services to the tune of $250 billion annually. He is oblivious to the relationship of trade deficits to foreign investment in America, in that when we send dollars abroad for goods and services, most of those dollars ultimately come back to America. And he refuses to grasp that tariffs are taxes paid by American importers and Americans, not foreigners. A perfect example of this unreasonableness is our reasonable trade deficit with Canada. The reason we have a trade deficit with Canada is because, starting with FDR, we entered into an agreement that would sell us oil at well below market prices. We entered into and maintained that deal because we maintained a trade deficit with Canada so that we can buy cheap oil, which is a huge benefit for America. And if we took that oil out of our trade relationship, guess what? We'd have a trade surplus. Yet Trump says we're getting ripped off, even though we are actually getting the benefit of that sweetheart deal. Now, absolutely, sometimes a trade deficit is a loss. Foreign trade barriers are a problem that includes tariffs and non-tariff barriers, but there are ways to remedy these things. Free trade agreements, as I talked about. Free trade agreements that don't require a tariff policy that cripples our economy. Yet, due to the president's fetish for tariffs and superficial thinking on trade deficits, the president has imposed a trade policy that makes the global baseline of 10% with countries that have trade surpluses like Singapore, Australia, Netherlands. Countries we have free trade agreements are getting tariffs at 10%. Countries that are free trade countries are getting tariff at 10%. It does make no sense. It makes no sense of exactly what the president wants to fix or how he's going about these tariffs. Now, it's really contradictory based on the lack of clear messaging out of your administration. If other countries eliminate their tariffs and we eliminate ours, that's just deal making, and we don't raise revenue, and businesses don't relocate to the U.S. If it's a permanent revenue source and you want to relocate to the U.S., then going to have these tariffs permanently, and there are not going to be any deals. So what is clear is that you can't have it both ways. Additionally, tariffs undermine our national security, as we're seeing in the Indo-Pacific region. Look, I know the president wants to bring back the Rust Belt. I get that. But a big part of that is political. It's nostalgia. And nostalgia, as they say, is the rust of memory. We are not victims here. Our economy is the envy of the world, partly because it was our choice to invest in other countries over saving. It was our choice to have bilateral trade deficits. This is not some unexpected crisis here. This is no extraordinary or unusual threat. This is because we chose to invest in other countries where labor is cheaper and therefore products are cheaper. And as we know, it's okay for working families to want to pay low prices for products in this country. I know that the president is saying we're getting screwed, but the fact is that Trump is screwing us with these incoherent, inchoate tariffs that in the short term and in the long term, domestically and internationally, and for our economy and for our national security, they are making us weaker. Thank you. I yield back.
I now recognize Ms. Van Dyne from Texas for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ambassador Greer, I'm sure it's been a long afternoon for you, but thank you for sitting it out. I want to thank you for being here today and for your engagement thus far on trade matters that are very important to all of us. Quite the contrast from your predecessor. I know that we've heard that the trade deficit, according to the president, isn't fair, but it's fact, is it not? That we are experiencing a $1.3 trillion deficit in trade, that Americans pay out over $360 billion last year in tariffs, and yet the U.S. collects less than $80 billion. I would say that that's fact. That's not just what the president thinks. It's fact. And let me be absolutely clear. President Trump's tariff policy is not a fetish. It's results-driven. For decades, we let our trading partners take advantage of us. China flooded our markets with subsidized steel. India slapped double-digit tariffs on U.S. goods. And the EU buried our industries in red tape. And meanwhile, Washington shrugged. But thanks to this administration's unapologetic use of tariffs, countries like Israel, India, Vietnam, Mexico, and the European Union are back at the table. And they're engaging because they know the United States is now finally serious. And when I hear Democrats criticize tariffs as some kind of economic sin, I have to ask, what's their alternative? Appeasement? President Trump's approach isn't theoretical. It is producing concrete results, as we have seen in the last few weeks. Results that the last administration only talked about. Tariffs are working, and not because we like them, but because we need them. They're leverage. And now they're actually making deals from a position of strength. I think that is very important. In North Texas, look, I've seen firsthand the value of trade that is fair, reciprocal, and firmly rooted in America's strategic interests. These are principles that are championed by you and President Trump. And I also understand something too many in this town seem to forget, is that trade without enforcement is surrender. And under the previous administration, enforcement was weak, inconsistent at best. Mexico violated its obligations under the 1944 Water Treaty, and they violated the USMCA with impunity. And American businesses were the ones that had to pay. We saw it firsthand with the case of Vulcan Materials, a company that operated lawfully in Mexico for decades, but then had their property invaded, shut down, and seized by Mexican armed forces. As we approach the USMCA review, can I ask how the administration is planning to protect these American business interests and ensure that Mexico complies with its obligations?
Yes, certainly, and thank you for your comments. What we see is that Mexico, despite their obligations under the USMCA, continues to discriminate against U.S. companies and U.S. products. We've seen this particularly in the energy sector, for example, where they have favored state-owned industries over American industries, which are cleaner and efficient. You mentioned the situation with Vulcan. That's something where we're paying attention. Mexico, we won a case against them about how they treat our corn, and they have a little constitutional amendment they're doing. We're watching that very closely to make sure they don't hit that. So there are a variety of unfair trading practices that Mexico has or threatens to have, where we're watching that very closely. And we expect any renegotiation or review of USMCA to focus on those types of issues.
Excellent, thank you. And while the tariffs are seeming to make progress in the right direction, I'm still really concerned with China's third country subsidies and their transshipment to the steel and aluminum industries, specifically in my district. That is very important, which have enacted and enabled them to evade our duties and our tariffs. Can you comment on the specific actions that we can expect to see from this administration in terms of cracking down on transshipment and duty evasion through third country circumvention?
Certainly, and this is, for example, you mentioned steel and aluminum. The president recently tightened exclusions and exemptions under steel and aluminum because of those types of issues. I think that we need to pay attention to whether goods coming in from Mexico and Canada, for example, whether they contain a lot of Chinese content. Some of this is Customs and Border Protection needs to do more enforcement. I know that they're focused on this, but I think that we need to make sure where we have trade agreements that the benefits of the agreement are going first to Americans, and then, of course, to trading partners who follow the rules. And we have to have enforcement, and enforcement means tariffs. People say they want enforcement, but in the trade space, enforcement means tariffs. So we're going that direction too.
I'm concerned that our current trade remedy laws will not suffice, which is why I'm leading the Level the Playing Field 2.0 Act with Ms. Sewell. Do you agree it's time for Congress to update trade remedy laws?
Oh, I certainly agree with that, yes.
Awesome. All right, Ambassador, we're at a pivotal moment. We finally have a trade policy that doesn't just talk about fairness, but it actually demands it. The Trump administration has sent a clear message. The era of taking advantage of the United States is over. Thank you again for your testimony and leadership, and I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes, and I just want to say thank you, Ambassador Greer, for taking the time to speak with us today. It's great to hear a voice of reason. I want to first thank you for including Germany's withholding tax on IP on USTR's list of investment barriers in the National Trade Estimate. And I look forward to working with you on this and ensuring fair treatment of American businesses across the world. I saw the list, and that was one of them, Section 49, so thank you very much. I am from a district, the second largest ag district in the country, number one in cattle, hogs, corn, soybeans, and so forth. 20% of our ag production in the United States goes to the export market. So my hope is to see tariffs imposed last week quickly lead to fair and reciprocal market access and to end many of the long-standing agricultural trade barriers around the world. I mean, that is really my hope. So if I may ask you, it's a really interesting time. We have 70 countries that President Trump said last night, 70 countries that want to negotiate, which is incredible. Can you talk to me, do you have the staff and resources to manage all these negotiations at this time, and how can we help?
Thank you. I, of course, could always use more staff. We had some folks leave, USTR career folks leave during the last administration. We have my deputies who are currently going through the confirmation process, but we have a strong staff. We have most of our political appointees in. We have career veteran USTR folks who know these issues, who have been there for many years. I know them from the last time I was there. I work very closely with them. This is a situation where we have embraced at the agency, and these folks are truly at the tip of the spear. They're the ones who helped put together this book with all the non-tariff trade barriers that we're putting together. So they know their brief, they know what they're doing, and when the countries come in, there's not a lot of extra homework that needs to be done because we know exactly the barriers we're targeting. So we're doing our best with what we have. I always welcome more staff, of course.
It's great to hear. So there's two types when it comes to trade. Obviously, there's the barriers, the concerns, but also there's the opportunity. I think about agriculture, that we can expand our markets to the UK, to India, to Kenya. There's so many areas that we can expand. Can you just touch on that? We're negotiating with 70 countries, but then we also want to expand these markets, these other markets. Can you just briefly talk on how we can create expansion for our agricultural community?
Certainly. Again, the foundation of the president's action is to achieve reciprocity, because we think we know the lack of reciprocity is a driver of this trade deficit that's left us in such a challenging situation. And so as you're seeking reciprocity, and again, we have countries coming and saying we're interested in reciprocity, part of that is making sure that they're treating us as we treat them. That means that they have to lower their tariffs, they lower their non-tariff barriers, and that's where you get the market access. That's where you get expanded markets. That's where our ag and other producers have the chance to really get their foot in the door instead of little bits and pieces here and there or an uncertain access. You get real access, you get reliable access, something that our farmers can count on.
So just to clarify that, so I can tell my farmers by the end of the day, after this is all settled, we should have dramatically expanded markets for them. Would that be a fair statement?
I think that's the expectation.
Yeah.
I think that's the expectation. We certainly want to. I mean, listen, with some countries, it's easier. They have fewer barriers. With others, it's harder. It's going to take some time. And in the meantime, they'll have that tariff. But my hope is that we can have a lot of these countries have reciprocal trade with us and we can be more competitive, whether we're farmers or manufacturers or producers, if we have real access to these other markets. Be more competitive here and produce here.
I want to thank you for your response to my letter to the USTR's proposed measure on Chinese-built marine vessels and for discussing it with me last week. The proposal of the USTR to counter China's shipbuilding industry would significantly increase freight costs on U.S. soybeans and soy products, in turn making the price of U.S. soybean products uncompetitive versus other countries. I'm hearing from my constituents that global soybean orders are simply being canceled and grain shippers cannot secure freight past May due to this uncertainty. I just wanted to hear from you again. So what can I tell my soybean producers? I'm the largest in the country, to give them some peace in this matter and what's happening.
Well, first of all, we should have final decision on that by the middle of this month. Second of all, there were a lot of proposed measures in that Section 301 action on shipbuilding I think that, and this could have been a communications issue, I think some people thought that all of those measures would be imposed. Those were proposed measures for people to comment on and receive feedback. We've now had that process where we've had the feedback, and now we consider which of those measures is most appropriate.
Thank you very much. I now yield myself back. Now I recognize Mr. Gomez from California for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. I want to just get to the point. I want to start off by making sure we're speaking the same language, Mr. Ambassador. Do you agree that tariffs are a tax, yes or no?
They're a tax on foreign goods.
Okay, so I'm glad you're here to say that, because also economists say that 98% of that tax is passed on to the American consumer, right? 98 to 99% is passed on to the American consumer in higher prices. And it's going to fall disproportionately, especially on working Americans. So higher costs when it comes to food. 40% of our produce are produced out of the country. Cars, clothes, shoes, household goods, all of it. And yesterday, you said, quote, there'll be some short-term pain. I want to know, and I think my constituents want to know, how long is short-term pain going to last? Is it 24 months?
I don't think it's 24 months, no.
2 years?
I don't think it's 2 years.
The reason why, is it 3 years? Is it a month? Because here's the thing. You also said yesterday, the other thing you did say yesterday, is you said the trade deficit grew over 30 years. It didn't happen overnight, so this problem is not going to be solved overnight. So you're saying on one hand, this is not going to be solved overnight, but then the long-term pain, it's going to be short-term pain. That doesn't compute. People don't believe it. And here's the thing. Just yesterday, it was said that it was going to be a $3,800 a year increase falling on working families and the cost of higher prices. It increased to $4,600. We had to actually cross that out because we made this board yesterday. What is the tax increase going to be tomorrow? Is it going to be $5,200? So, and the reason why is that we have different definitions of short-term pain. What was your last, before beginning confirm at USTR, where did you work?
I worked at King & Spalding.
King & Spalding. How much does a partner make at King & Spalding?
Well, it depends on a lot of different factors. But
so
it makes
I can pull up your financial disclosure. I don't have it in front of me. But one of the things that we're shown, it's about $1.5 million. My constituents don't make that. The average American consumer doesn't make that. The way we do it is every single month, we look at our budgets and see how much we spent, and then actually have to decide what do we have to pull back on.
I grew up in a mobile home working several jobs.
So here's
I know what it means.
Here's the thing. You
in
also
a mobile
have,
home.
You also have a cabinet of billionaires. You have Lucknick, you have Bessent, you have the president himself, you have Elon Musk, Donald Trump, who has billions. So for them, $4,600 doesn't mean anything. But for the average worker, it does. So this is where I say, you guys are out of touch when it comes to things. And I recognize you're working a lot of different jobs. So I'm going to move on to ask a question. In your testimony, you said Ms. Sanchez said you are the acting head of special counsel. Aren't you also the acting head of the Office of Government Ethics?
I was recently assigned to that position, yes.
Correct.
Mr. Gomez.
So let me get this straight. You are the chief USTR representative, the active chief of ethics. You're also the chief whistleblower, and now you're leading negotiations of 70 countries. So where's your priority? Those other jobs, or is it the trade agenda?
Well, my first job is USTR, and we have staff at the other agencies.
So the reason why it doesn't seem right, here's why. Because I've learned over the years, if you want to make somebody feel special, you give them more titles. Because in the end, who did Donald Trump said was actually running the trade agenda?
Well, the
Commerce Secretary Lucknick. That's who he said. Here's another question. Are you using Signal to communicate with the executive branch? Yes or no?
With the community, we do some logistics from time to time.
Okay. Well, make sure you're as required by the Presidential Records Act and Federal Records Acts that you're submitting those for posterity.
We'll talk to our general counsel to see what's required by law.
Also, do you still stand by the formula that was used to assign the tariffs?
Oh, yeah, the White House economist. Yeah, it's driven by the deficit.
Okay, the reason why is that conservative economists have said that this formula was actually, there's miscalculations in the formula. That some people are even saying that it was ChatGPT was used to come up with the formula.
That's not true at all.
So
it's completely false.
Here's the reason.
It's completely false that ChatGPT was used.
The
That's
reason
just a
why
lie.
is like, nobody has confidence in what you're doing. Because you're basically, you guys are saying, trust us. Trust that it's going to be short-term pain. But here's what we see. We see a plan that doesn't make any sense, a formula that has flaws in it that people have torn apart, that you've seen the price increase in the stock market crashing and red lights blinking on a recession. So, and then you impose tariffs on an island that is inhabited by penguins. So the consumer confidence is plummeting, and it's going down, down, down. And you guys are saying, trust us. That the Republicans, Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and you guys know what you're doing. So that doesn't pass the smell test. It doesn't make any sense. We worked on other issues before, and I hope we can work on other issues moving forward. But you guys need to be straight on who's running the show, because this is going to fall and hurt the American worker. With that, I yield back.
Ms. Malliotakis.
Thank you, Ambassador. I very much appreciate your testimony here today. And I understand the President's goal of wanting to reduce unfair tariffs that are placed on the United States, that he wants to level the playing field, that he wants to reduce the trade deficit, that he wants to remove barriers to entry, and he wants to reshore manufacturing. I think we need to be cautious. I get concerned about doing too much at one time, about biting off more than we can chew. To date, though, we have seen trillions of dollars in new private investment. Since the President has taken office, domestic and foreign companies are expanding or opening new facilities here in the United States. And as you mentioned in your testimony, there's over 50 countries that are coming to the table because they want to make deals. I just want to bring up some of the concerns I've heard from manufacturers, importers from New York that I've spoken to, and they want to make sure that you're considering the impact that tariffs could have on materials, on parts, on supplies that are needed to manufacture here in the United States. Because obviously the goal is to bring those jobs home, to reshore as much as possible. But if there's tariffs on plastics, lumber, metals, it obviously makes it very difficult to manufacture here at home. And also, some of the importers that I've been speaking with have invested a lot of money to divest out of China and move into other friendlier nations, Cambodia, for example, Vietnam. And they're concerned that the across-the-board tariffs in Asia are impacting their supply chain and ultimately their businesses. And they're hopeful that deals will come forward very quickly. But they've made it also very clear that they can't wait 90 days for a deal to be made. And that it would literally close their business. And so I just want to hear from you on where you think you're making inroads there, on making deals with some of these countries to avoid that type of scenario. And if you could just answer those two, comment on those 2 points first.
Certainly, I'm happy to do that. And again, just to reiterate, we've had these, this enormous trade deficit that developed under President Biden. These things are supposed to be self-correcting under normal economic theory. When they're not, it shows that there's something structural at risk here. So that's what's being addressed. We now have so many countries saying, we're not going to retaliate against you, we're going to work with you, we're going to try to figure out a way forward, that the President is looking forward to trying to find a way forward to make deals with these folks. China is on its own path. It's chosen retaliation for many years. It's chosen uncertainty. I won't comment much further on the U.S.-China relationship, but I think what you're talking about, Congresswoman, with respect to these other countries, I think we could count on having some deals with them within the next few weeks or months.
Yeah, I hope it's more the few weeks, because I think, again, too many months may hurt the ability for these companies to survive there. At least if you're able to do some business in Vietnam or Cambodia, you don't have to rely on communist China, which we're already starting to move out. But I feel like that's a real issue, because even if we want to bring the supply chain home, this brings me to my second point about pharmaceuticals. We've all said it here today. 4 years that Joe Biden was there, he did nothing to reduce our dependency on communist China for our medical supply. In fact, from 2020 to last year, we saw $213 billion worth of medicine imported from China. That's a 2.5-time increase than the decade before. And so we are relying more today, post-COVID, on communist China for our pharmaceuticals, and that is a very dangerous thing. But my question is, with your goal of trying to bring facilities back home. I mean, it does take about 7 years to get one of these manufacturing plants up and running. How do you close the gap? If the president's going to do tariffs on pharmaceuticals, which I would really caution against that, but if that is the goal, to try to get them to come back home, we know it takes about 7 years for those plants to get up and running. How are we going to close that gap so we're not, hurting ourselves in the process, but we are doing what we need to do, which is bring that supply chain home?
Well, I think there's a role for Congress in bringing home the supply chains. The president can act with the authorities he's been given, and we found that a tariff is, in the first term, we found a tariff is a way to become less dependent on China, for example. We know it works. It's just math. The data's there. That's how it is. To the extent that Congress is interested in helping reshore and creating, tax structures that incentivize manufacturing, I think that's just really important. I think we have to have that.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because I actually have legislation to do just that, to incentivize our sensitive supply chain, particularly pharmaceuticals, back here, and also to utilize Puerto Rico, which has had historically the infrastructure to do it. I agree with my friend Dr. Murphy, who pointed that out earlier, and I have 2 pieces of legislation that I hope the committee will take up, or perhaps we'll put a piece in the tax package. But I do look forward to working with you. I think it does take more than that. We also have to reduce some of the regulatory framework and some of the permitting process that takes too long. But we can get there, but we need to make sure we don't hurt ourselves in the interim. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Mr. Kerry.
Mr. Ambassador, a pleasure to be with you today. Thank you for your testimony. I also want to compliment you. I think anybody that has had a successful career on the private sector, who's willing to come back into the public sector, says a lot about the character of the person. So I appreciate your service to the country, sir. I was pleased to see the administration's decision to exclude oil and natural gas from these new reciprocal tariffs on countries with unfair trade practices. As we all know, one of the administration's top priorities is increasing U.S. oil and gas production, which is a shared goal of mine. As many of you know, Ohio is one of the largest coal-producing states east of the Mississippi River. But in order to accomplish this, the energy industry will need access to key materials and inputs to bring these projects online and help keep the U.S. as the top supplier of energy resources. Many of these products, including specialized steel, are not currently produced in the United States. I mean, it's just a matter of fact. These products are designed to handle unique operating environments like higher pressures and temperatures needed for energy production. Many of these specialized products, there really is no domestic option. I mean, it's just, there isn't. So can you share how USTR is considering treatment for these types of key end-of-use materials like specialty steel in regard to the tariffs, especially considering that many of these products cannot be sourced in the U.S. and are essential to help deliver the administration's energy agenda?
So, Congressman, the specialty steel you're talking about is not covered by the reciprocal tariff. The Commerce Department, using Section 232 action, they oversee any tariffs on steel and aluminum, and so I'm not trying to pass the buck, but they're much better place to talk about how that's being implemented.
I just want to identify this as something that is very concerning to a lot of people. So we'll follow up with your team, and we'll follow up the right people. The other thing I do want to bless you. Bless you.
Sorry.
Bless you.
I yield back the balance of my time. No. Ambassador, I also want to echo Congressman Feenstra's comments about the Chinese-flagged vessels that are going into certain ports. That's a very big issue for a lot of commodities. I don't care whether it's corn or coal or soybeans, whatever it is. So I appreciated your remarks on that, but it's something that we will definitely follow up with you on. One of the things, President Trump unleashed the American LNG industry by ending the former administration's era permitting pause. And as you know, the U.S. LNG industry is already being targeted by nations that are subject to the president's new tariffs. So my question to you is, do you have any plans to prioritize America's newly restored LNG export capacity in conversations with foreign nations?
That's something that comes up regularly. Obviously, we've been talking about the trade deficit, and many countries have been quick to say, one area where the U.S. is very competitive is oil and LNG, and it's something that they want to buy. And so it's been very common in these conversations for them to suggest that that is one way to help achieve, more trade balance, et cetera.
I appreciate your answer. And lastly, I'd like to briefly touch on the USMCA sunset review, if you don't mind. USMCA qualifying trade was excluded from the tariffs announced on April 2nd. This will help many of the U.S. manufacturers. The reason I wasn't in the room most of the days, they were in my office, that have made investments under the rules President Trump negotiated 5 years ago. USMCA is facing a sunset review process that needs to be completed by the end of July of 2026. Will the tariff exclusion continue to the lead-up of that review to give the manufacturers more certainty in the upcoming months?
Well, that's the current status. All right, I don't want to get ahead of the president on how he wants to treat that, but that's certainly the current status, and I would expect that if Canada and Mexico continue on this path, that would continue to be the status.
And again, I want to compliment you for your service to the country and being willing to go back into the public sector. A lot of people don't realize you're giving up on a lot. You're spending a lot more time, probably a lot more hours, a lot more time away from your family, and so I just want you to know, as a member of this committee, I certainly appreciate your service. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Mr. Horsford.
Thank you, Chairman Smith, and to the ranking member. Mr. Trade Representative, are you aware that the tariffs have been paused?
I am, yes.
When were you made aware of that?
Well, I understood the decision was made a few minutes ago. It's something
Sitting here,
under discussion.
Sitting here, under discussion. So did you know that that this was under discussion, and why did you not include that as part of your opening remarks?
So typically what I don't do is divulge the contents of my discussions with
What are the
President
details of the
Congress.
pause?
Well, my understanding is that because so many countries have decided not to retaliate, we're going to have about 90 days.
No, excuse me? China increased their tariffs on the United States. Trump blinked.
What's the blink, sir?
What do you know about this pause? What are the details of it?
Well, the details, as I understand it, is that China continues to retaliate. Other countries didn't retaliate. The president 2 or 3 days ago said we wanted to negotiate with those countries that asked for meetings. That's what we're doing.
What are the
We've had
details?
discussion.
How long is the pause? How many days? How many weeks?
I understand it's 90 days. I haven't spoken to the president since I've been
So
in
the
this
trade
hearing.
representative hasn't spoken to the president of the United States about a global reordering of trade.
Yes, I have. I've
And
just
yet
been in the hearing with you, sir.
But yet he announced it on a tweet. WTF? Who's in charge?
The president of the United States is in charge.
And what do you know about those details?
Well, as I mentioned,
It looks like your boss just pulled the rug out from under you and paused the tariffs, the taxes on the American people. There's no strategy. You just found out 3 seconds ago sitting here. We saw you.
we've been discussing a
If
variety
you
of these
came
actions
here
for-
knowing that you were going to be turned off, that these tariffs were going to be turned off, why didn't you include that in your opening statement? Why didn't you reference that as part of your testimony?
Well, I don't disclose my conversations with the president, sir.
These were specific questions we asked you all along. What's the strategy? These are real consequences for the American people and small businesses. I had a group of small businesses in my office earlier today talking about the impacts of these tariffs on aluminum and steel. This is amateur hour, and it needs to stop. What does this even mean for your negotiating strategy? How are you in charge of negotiation if the president is tweeting about this from wherever the hell he is?
The president was elected, and he runs the trade policy, and I advise him and execute his
Who
trade
executes
policy.
the trade policy?
I execute the trade
Did you
policy
know
with the president.
that this was happening?
We have been discussing all kinds of
And there's another
options.
member of the cabinet, Bessent, who just canceled coming to the Hill to avoid talking about the market because it's in turmoil. This in just days because there was no strategy, there was no plan. The president chose to take actions that he didn't even have the authority to take. He's put our economy in disarray and near collapse. We have small businesses and Americans who are concerned about their well-being, people's retirement, people's 529. accounts went down because of this administration. We have people that are planning to send their kids to college this fall. People who are retiring whose benefits have declined. Is this market manipulation?
No.
Why not? If it was a plan, if it was always the plan, how is this not market manipulation?
It's not market manipulation, sir.
Well, then what is it? Because it sure is not a strategy.
We're trying to reset the global trade system.
You're,
That has offshored,
what
offshored all of our factories.
And what has that done?
Offshored all of
How
our
have you
jobs.
done? How have you achieved any of that? But to enact enormous harm on the American people, which was our concern from the very beginning. Tariffs are a tool. It can be used in the appropriate way to protect U.S. jobs and small businesses. But that's not what this does. So if it's not market manipulation, what is it? Who's benefiting? What billionaire just got richer? And all the while, there are not even any Republicans left in this hearing. They all left because they don't even want to defend this. But meanwhile, the Speaker is rushing to the floor to pass a budget reconciliation to screw America by passing the biggest tax cut in history on the backs of the American people? WTF! Who's in charge? Because it sure doesn't look like it's the trade representative. You just got the rug pulled out from under you. I wish I could feel some empathy, but the empathy I have is for the American people whose very well-being and livelihoods are being affected. This is not a game. This is real life. I yield back.
Let the record reflect that there's more Republicans in this chamber than there are Democrats currently in this committee room. There's 6 of us, there's 5 of you. So let's make sure we get the facts right. I appreciate the president did not blink on China, as was said earlier, and it needs to be corrected in the record. In fact, he increased China by 125%.
Would you yield, Mr. Chairman?
I do not.
Yield? Can we have a colloquy?
No.
We don't want to talk about the trade policy here in the Trade Committee. This is our jurisdiction.
Your time has expired, and I'm more than happy to talk to you.
I asked if you would yield.
And I said no.
Because you don't want to defend the policy or the strategy. Kick me out. What you going to do? Kick me out.
Mr. Yocum, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ambassador Greer, it's good to see you today. As we discussed in the past, Indiana's 2nd District has the type of production economy that he would like to make for the entire country. We manufacture 85% of the nation's RVs, 60% of artificial knees and hips, as well as boats, trailers, buses, auto parts, Humvees, you name it. We also have a ton of ag in my district: corn, soybeans, eggs, dairy, ducks, beef, pork, lumber, potatoes, and tomatoes. I could go on. Lumber alone, I was actually just meeting with a cabinet manufacturer here a few minutes ago. I couldn't even remember if I had been to that cabinet manufacturer's site because we have so many of them in my district. I don't know how we do all that in one area, but somehow we do. All this to say, supply chains matter, both getting inputs in the door and outputs out to market. Small hang-ups can create expensive backups. A drip of price hikes can turn into a stream, and that stream can turn into a river for something with thousands of components. I hope we can get some good deals quickly. It probably won't come as a surprise to you, Mr. Ambassador, when I tell you that when an RV or boat is exported, it tends to not go very far. In fact, 90% of RV exports are to Canada. However, Canadian retaliation tariffs against RVs began today, and boats are on the bubble. Are you consulting with industries and companies being targeted by these retaliatory tariffs?
So, Congressman, in many cases, yes. I understand that the retaliatory tariffs by Canada are related to the steel and aluminum tariffs. And so that would be the Commerce Department. But we certainly, we meet with all these folks, right? Whether it's covered by the Commerce Department or someone else, they want a meeting, we take it, we listen, and we provide the feedback that's necessary. You know, and obviously we're talking to all of these countries to get to a position where we have better terms of trade with them, where we can ensure that we have domestic steel and aluminum manufacturing and the other critical sectors that are so important to our economy.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. I also want to get your thoughts on a recent New York Times article titled, "The Tsunami is Coming." China's global exports are just getting started. It reports that Chinese state-controlled banks lent an extra $1.9 trillion to industrial borrowers over the last 4 years. But all those factories aren't just churning out to gizmos and gadgets destined for their domestic consumption. China's promised shift to a consumption economy remains just that, a promise. Increased production paired with low consumption just means that China continues to double down on overcapacity. And these numbers bear that out. Exports rose 13% in 2023 and 17% in 2024. It seems like there's a global recognition that the threat posed by China's overcapacity is real. The EU, Brazil, Indonesia, Thailand, and others have also imposed tariffs on China to counter the flood of cheap exports. It's not just us. Reports suggest that Canada and Mexico are open to coordinating with the United States on China's overcapacity. Are you able to comment, Mr. Ambassador, on reports that Canada and Mexico are open to coordination on Chinese overcapacity? And if they were to coordinate with us, would that potentially create an off-ramp for Canada and Mexico on the U.S. tariffs?
So in the first instance, I appreciate you highlighting that. And overcapacity in China, it infects the whole world, right? It can displace products in third countries that come to us indirectly. And that's often why we do a global tariff action, because the Chinese actions are not just bilateral. They cause a problem for the whole economy. And so we have to take global actions to make sure there aren't loopholes or Swiss cheese. With respect to Canada and Mexico, I won't get into the details of our negotiations with them. I'll defer to their public statements. But for my part, I would say we have encouraged
be flowing to the rest of the G7 and to the global South.
And Mr. Secretary, how much of this decision was driven by the bond market cratering overnight? What is happening with bonds? Is China selling their bonds?
I have nothing that says that, and we actually had quite a good 10-year auction today, and all this was, again, this was driven by the president's strategy. He and I had a long talk on Sunday, and this was his strategy all along, and that, you might even say that he goaded China into a bad position. They responded. They have shown themselves to the world to be the bad actors. And we are willing to cooperate with our allies and with our trading partners who did not retaliate. It wasn't a hard message. Don't retaliate. Things will turn out well.
What's your message to the Politico article saying that the countries were getting called back?
These negotiations with these 75 countries, how long will that take? Will it be a matter of weeks? Will it be a matter of months? Do you expect financial markets to be stable during that time period?
Well, we've started with a 90-day pause, and we will see if more countries turn up, what will happen. But we have a meeting with Vietnam today, and we have one of the largest trade deficits with them, so I'm hoping it will move in a good direction. I was at the Japanese ambassador's house last night for the Cherry Blossom Festival, which was quite festive, and he and I had a good chat. They are going to send a deal team over, so we'll see. These are complicated negotiations. These are imbalances that have taken decades to create, but I think having seen the maximum level that Donald Trump is willing to go to, President Trump has created this negotiating leverage.
Excuse me, everybody.
Excuse me. The secretary is obviously a very busy man. As he has said, he's had more than 75 countries that the trade team has to respond to. I'd just like to end with this. For decades, Republicans and Democrats have said that these unfair trade practices are ripping off the American people, are ripping off our country, but nobody has ever done anything to address it. We finally have a president here at the White House who is playing the long game, who is doing what is right for the American worker and our industries here at home, and he has put together a fantastic team in Secretary Bessent, Secretary Lutnick, the entire trade team who will be focusing on negotiating these good deals to put the American workers first, and we're going to get to work to do that. Thank you.
What about the EU? What about the EU? They retaliated this morning.
All right, the Treasury Secretary and the Press Secretary there with the big important announcement that there's going to be a 90-day pause in the imposition of tariffs against 75 countries who are coming to the table. Thought it was interesting that he said that the president goaded China into a bad position, which is now facing 125% tariff. So we asked Secretary Rollins at the top of the hour, how long will this disruption, how long will Americans have to weather the disruption? The answer was about 15 minutes.
Exactly. On the breaking news, let's bring in Charlie Gasparino from Fox Business Network now. Whew, this is quite the moment. As you can imagine, the art of the deals all over the Twitter sphere right now, as people say, I mean, maybe this is the way he planned it. To John's point, Charlie, about the Treasury Secretary saying maybe you could say that he goaded China into a bad position for themselves.
Well,
don't retaliate. Things will work out well, he said.
I mean, I want to tell you right now that Donald Trump outsmarted the world. Trust me, I'm an American. I support my president. But that's not really what happened here, from what I understand. And I know I'll get pushback, but here's what it is. First off, we should point out that one of the good things about this is that Scott Bessent is finally in the White House. He's finally leading this. I mean, up until a couple of days ago, it was Lutnick, it was Peter Navarro, the Commerce Secretary, the trade advisor, very much hawks. Now it's Scott Bessent, who believes in cutting deals as opposed to, just just putting these tariffs out there and let's be a mercantilistic economy. That's number one. But number two, let's recall what happened overnight. And from what I understand, and I'm getting this from people that are talking to the White House, what happened in the bond market overnight, the spike in yields on the 30-year and the 10-year bond, which showed that people were dumping our bonds. And who were those people dumping our bonds? Japan, the biggest holder of bonds, was selling bonds. That's what I'm getting from some very big money managers. China, maybe to some extent, but it was largely Japan and others. If you have a mass sale of bonds, that means people are losing confidence in the U.S. economy, on the ability to do deals with us. And from what I understand, this is what forced the hand of this 90-day reprieve. Now, is it a good thing? Are people coming to the table? Yeah. But if you read between the lines, or not even what Scott Bessent said, we have no deals. Right? There's nobody that is really there saying, this is what we're going to do. And they paused it anyway. So my thing said, well, I'll give you this. There is some art of the deal here. And by the way, brilliant move by putting China in the corner. But that's a whole separate thing. Because remember, that's a very difficult negotiation. Everybody else is a lot easier. They do want to deal with us. Whether they want to be, forced into really bad trade deals on their end is a whole other negotiating story. But make no mistake about it, you cannot divorce this decision right here from what happened last night, which was, people focus on the stock market all the time. It's the bond market and the sort of lending markets that's the plumbing of the economy. And those markets were imploding last night. And that's why we have a 90-day deal.
Very much, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member. Ambassador, good afternoon. I had quite a number of questions about tariffs, but since that's on pause, I'm going to pause on those questions and deal with one that is more specific to my district and one that I'm concerned with, and that's regarding a proposed rule that you have that has been put out, and I know that there have been testimony about it. In the U.S. Virgin Islands and throughout the Caribbean, as well as some of the other territories. In Hawaii, we import virtually everything needed for daily life, from food products, poultry, groceries, vehicles, etc. 97% of the food that's consumed in my district comes from imported goods. I'm deeply concerned about the impact of trade actions, particularly because it seems very apparent that I don't know if the American territories, particularly when it comes to American businesses and jobs in the shipbuilding capacity. We know that you've proposed a rule to to impose fees on those ships which are not made, that are Chinese made, that are not American made. However, a large portion of ships which are much smaller than those that are made in American ports, the American ports are predominantly making those for the military purposes. It's cost effective for them to do it for the military, but not for those kinds of cargo shipping that's done in the Caribbean region. It doesn't provide a balance for us, and we are concerned not only in the Virgin Islands, but Puerto Rico, as well as the other Caribbean islands, that this imposition of $1 million per port that is being proposed will bear incredible impact on us. U.S. shipping industry serving the Caribbean cannot absorb additional costs of the proposed port fees, which would have a significant economic consequence to us. I have the median income, family income in the Virgin Islands is $30,000 a year. The cost of $1 million per port is going to be passed on to the consumers in my district, to the business owners. We are about to start a rebuilding of 20 schools, 2 hospitals, a complete microgrid